over in the Mellon College of Science here at Carnegie Mellon. I work in corporate and government relations, and I've also been a key member of the planning team for a central laboratory facility we're building called the CMU Cloud Lab. This is a remotely operated lab that supports research in chemistry, the life sciences, material science, and other disciplines. And this technology was developed by two very talented Carnegie Mellon alumni. And we're fortunate enough to have one of them here today to talk to us. DJ Kleinbaum is co-founder and co-CEO of Emerald Cloud Lab. And he's going to be able to give you a quick overview of the platform, tell you a bit about it, maybe touch on the partnership that we have between Emerald Cloud Lab and Carnegie Mellon. We are bringing a cloud lab here to Pittsburgh. It's going to be located, it is located over in the Bakery Square area and is very close to being operational. We're very excited about this. Now, CMU has made a substantial investment in this platform, and really the reasoning behind that is we see the potential that it has to change the way that we do fundamental discovery science. And we're very excited about this, as well as where we see this going with our ability to change how we educate the next generation and getting out ahead of that education of the next generation of scientists. Now, it's going to be our very talented faculty and students that are going to be the pioneers in this field. And we have today Rebecca Taylor, goes by Bex, is here. She is the, let me get this right, the ANSYS Career Development Associate Professor in Mechanical Engineering with courtesy appointments in Biomedical Engineering, Electrical, and Computer Engineering. And she's going to be able to, I think, speak a little bit to the potential that we see for how this platform can help us to really change how, as I said, discovery science is done. She's been one of the leaders in exploring how to use this platform in scientific research and in training the next generation of students. And we see this, not only for the uses that we see internally at Carnegie Mellon, but we really are setting this up to be what we hope will be the center of a very vibrant ecosystem where we collaborate with a lot of outside partners and make this really the center of something bigger than is just useful for the university. And we have with us today Currie Crookston from Covestro. He is the global head of ecosystems in Covestro. And I think he's going to be discussing a little bit about how Covestro sees sort of the ability to partner with CMU and make use of this platform and what it can do for research and industry and for the needs that they have in industry. So I think just to sort of put a little context here, we're early in this journey. This is something we're just getting running. As I mentioned, it's going to be up and operational here in the next few months. We're very excited about this. And I think what you're going to hear from folks here is not only what this is, but sort of that sense of excitement that we all have for where this can take us. So, all right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to DJ.
Thank you, Ed. Morning. So I'm very excited to be back at CMU today and talking to you about what we are building at Emerald and the way that we are working with CMU on this very exciting project. For those of you who are not deeply in the scientific field, scientific research is incredibly important. It drives our economy, it drives the world economy, it is how we move things forward. The problem is that it is very difficult to reproduce. It's slow, it's expensive, it's very difficult to access. So there have been all of these studies about how difficult it is to reproduce things that have been published in the scientific literature. It takes a really long time to make progress. We have this idea in the pharmaceutical industry of what is called Eroom's law. And so if you can't do the wordplay there, that's Moore's law backwards, because the cost of bringing a new drug to market is doubling every 9 or 11 years or so. So it's exponentially bad. It's the opposite of Moore's law. And so in order to drive scientific research forward, we need better solutions and we need better process. And so that's sort of where we started with Emerald. I'm really having trouble with this clicker. All right, so what Emerald is a remote control life sciences lab. So we have a software application that scientists anywhere in the world can use to design experiments as if you were standing in the lab yourself. Once you have designed your experiment and submitted it to the system, it gets run in an ECL facility, and then the data is handed back to you through the same software application, which also includes a whole suite of tools for analysis, visualization, plotting, basically figuring out what happened in your experiment and deciding what you want to do next. If this sounds familiar, it's because it is. This is the same idea of virtualization that Amazon first brought to data centers with AWS. And if we go back a little bit further, this is the entire foundry model that drives the semiconductor industry, led by companies like Taiwan Semiconductor. And so it's important to think about what we're actually trying to do here and why tools like this are so important to scientific research. So there we go. All right, so here's your typical scientist. Just like in computer scientists, we still have this idea of 10x scientists or 100x scientists in the field. The problem is that they lack leverage. It's very hard to be a 10x scientist because of the lack of leverage. So why do they lack leverage? They lack leverage because even though these individuals can have incredible value creation potential, they are ultimately very limited by some relatively mundane human constraints. They need to sleep, they only have 2 hands, and they need to be where the instruments are that they're going to be running. So one person can only do so much. You can't actually turn this cycle time, you can't actually crank this cycle time up like you can in more computational fields. And the problem is that we as a industry are really bad at trying to figure out how to give these brilliant scientists leverage. Because what we do is we give them more people. And so now you have your brilliant scientist who communicates what they want to have done to the senior scientists who work for them, who then communicate that to the technicians who are actually in the lab. And this is a whole game of whisper down the lane going down, and then a whole game of confirmation bias coming back up. So we have fundamentally the same problems with this system, and then we've added a whole new layer of problems on top of that around people maybe not necessarily understanding the design of the experiment or what it's trying to do. Maybe the skill level of these technicians is different, so you get different results. It is a mess. And so what we have tried to do with Emerald is to directly connect the scientists to all of these instruments. And we do that through building this fully computational interface to the lab, where you not only can read the data and metadata coming out of the lab, but you can actually write back to the lab in a computational way. Another way to think about this is to think about what we have built is an instruction set for the lab. So you can do anything on an x86 processor that is allowed in that instruction set. We have effectively built that type of system for any laboratory operation that you could want to do. And the result of that is that we're able to make scientific research more reproducible, faster, cheaper, and more accessible. And so this is the innovation that we are trying to bring to this ecosystem by giving you the ability to separate the manual labor that has to happen in the lab, the muscle, that's us, from the brain, the actual scientific ingenuity and thought process around designing experiment. That's you, that's the scientist, that's our customer. And so this idea of separating these things is what allows you to get this degree of leverage. And we are only getting started with this. The next step is to start to incorporate more computational tools. Now that you have this fully computational interface built to the lab, you can start to add in additional computational tools where you can, rather than designing a whole set of experiments yourself, you can actually give an algorithm, and this is actually pioneered by computational biology professors right here at Carnegie Mellon. You can give an algorithm a desired goal, like find a way to separate these 2 compounds by a certain amount of time in a chromatography experiment. And then it will just optimize that experiment. You give it the constraints and the desired output, and then it can just run to optimize that experiment in a closed loop manner. Similarly, you can do reinforcement-based learning for experimental simulation, so that before you even start an experiment, you can simulate a whole set of different conditions. And we're not at the point yet, we're not even close to being at the point yet where you can say definitively what the scientific outcome will be, but you can stack rank these things in terms of okay, this set of conditions has a 90% confidence interval of giving you the result you want, whereas this one, maybe it's more 10 to 15%. So these are all things that you're able to do. These are all emergent properties of having a computational interface to the lab. And what we've started to see, even though this is very early days, I'm going in the wrong direction with my slides. What we've started to see is that if a traditional scientist can run one experiment per person per day, once someone has been using our system, they're able to run more like 5 to 8 experiments per person per day. And the power users on our systems, the ones that are most leveraging these AI and computational tools, we've seen people doing 25x what you would expect a traditional scientist to do. And that ability, that degree of leverage is going to allow us to accelerate the rate at which we're able to make progress in scientific research. Where this is all going, what this full digitization allows you to do, and what Carnegie Mellon is a huge part of, is this idea of a network of these facilities. Because they all speak the same language, because they're all driven by this unified computational interface and language, you can build an entire network of labs that are fully interoperable, where the only way that you need to connect them is effectively by shipping samples back and forth, which last time I checked, FedEx was pretty good at. And so you can build labs that have disparate functionalities, where you don't have to have the lab over here and the lab next door to it and the lab next door to that have the same instruments and are effectively doing the same thing. You can build these as resource centers around not just life sciences and pharmaceutical research, but material science and agriculture and battery chemistry. And you can wire these things all together in a way that you get all of these wonderful properties of the network, such that scientists are no longer limited by the instruments that they have in their lab or that their department or university gives them access to. And CMU is really like one of the first nodes in this network. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited that CMU is a part of this is because, the way that we talk about this, and we talk about this with the university, is if this looks familiar, it should. Wow, that slide really did not come out well. Sorry about that. Needs to be a little darker. Anyway, this is very similar to the early days of the internet. This is, we're in ARPANET. We're in the ARPANET era of this Cloud Lab network. But the ability to distribute the scientific research that broadly is going to be incredibly important to how fast we're able to advance things going forward. Thanks.
I'm Rebecca Taylor. Everyone calls me Bex at CMU. You can find my lab by searching those keywords. And my lab is, I think, a good example of a potential user for cloud labs. We're also innovators in the space of DNA nanotechnology, and so I'll sort of take you on a tour of where we think this field can go in terms of practical, scaled-up, high-quality products. Okay. Maybe? Thank you, Sean. Okay, cool. So this is a summary of what my lab really does. And after speaking with folks last night, I realized I probably should have included an additional slide here, so I'll tee it up by saying my first career was in product design. So I worked making medical devices, consumer products in a device consultancy. And so I've seen this whole process of product design as sort of in a turnkey shop environment. When I returned to academia, I started working ever smaller, right? First with microsystems, and then with nanosystems that interface with biology. But you're looking at someone who considers themselves a toolmaker and sort of product designer. And so if I can convince you of anything, it's that DNA is a fabulous engineering material, and I think one of tomorrow's emerging materials in innovation. Okay. So what does that mean? My lab is just exploring how on earth do we use this material. We use technologies like DNA origami to weave together structures to make arbitrary shapes that are addressable. We can decorate them with sort of the molecules of your choice and then use them in a range of applications. And biomedical applications clearly make sense, but there are also additional avenues we're investigating, thinking about how we do the science fiction goal of kind of like printable matter, structures that build themselves from nothing into a bigger organized system with hierarchical organization. we're moving that way, and we see the Cloud Lab as a wonderful opportunity to get those nanostructured feedstocks produced. Anyway, so there's a whole range of things we encompass, and then finally, for us, the tools we have on hand for computationally designing our systems, they limit everything we can do. So not only are we interested in applying the technology, but also pushing forward our capabilities for designing DNA-based nanostructures and nanomachines. That's a mouthful. Okay, so that's what's on. All right. So to give you an illustration, this is an animation. It's not a molecular simulation, just an animation of how DNA-based nanosystems come together. Somebody doesn't have small tweezers putting them together. We design complementary sequences of long-stranded and short-stranded DNA, and then we just anneal them, basically warm them up to denature them, slowly cool them, and they will explore the space of ways to come together and then actually finally come together in a designed shape. And I can play that maybe one more time. Or maybe Sean can play that for me one more time. Okay, but the whole point is, right here you can see the strands are really floppy, right? When they hybridize and find the complement that they're paired to, they get 25 times more stiff. And now we have a material that's equivalent to a hard plastic, right? And so DNA is basically just scaffolding, multi-purpose scaffolding that builds itself. Okay, so we find that really exciting. Great. Okay, so coming back to the product designer side of things, in an academic lab, how do we use them? I think the field at present is basically in cottage industry stage. We think of these things as breadboards. We build a little nanostructure, we can attach molecules of your interest, and we can like hack together any one you want any day of the week. And so I go to conferences, I show all the wonderful things we're doing, we get a new collaborator who is amazed by what we can do. But really, we're doing a unique design. There's no standardization, there's no mass production. So while it's important for us to explore what's possible, there's a huge opportunity to actually apply these, to move DNA nanotechnology from, oh, it's cute, oh, it's a breadboard, into these are products. Okay. All right. The animations are failing. But if you ignore the bottom part, essentially what I'll show you in the next slide is we work on the mechanical design side of DNA nanostructures, and instead of having a student pipette, 600 times per structure, which could take, 6 to 8 hours to make a novel structure, the Cloud Lab is perfect for this. Also perfect for characterization, right? Likewise, if we want to manufacture biomedical research tools, make the sort of input materials for new materials, so to build those sort of input, seed materials for material science research, the Cloud Lab can make them. And then finally, when you think about tools like cargo delivery, therapeutic delivery, gene therapy, we need good manufacturing practices, aligned manufacturing processes, and we need large amounts of this material, and we need it to be high quality. And so this is where we think, yeah, let's encode all the knowledge that our lab has and use a pipeline where the Cloud Lab is doing the boring part and doing it far better than a human could do it. Okay, all right, so I'll show you basically a few stories that show the kind of things that we're doing. And look, here's work that I did in collaboration with John Kagan's lab, and our student, Balatito Babatunde, has really driven this all forward. And what she did was basically design a formal language that encoded what honeycomb lattice multi-layer DNA origami does. I know that's a mouthful, but essentially as a mechanical designer, she wrote 3 rules that if followed repeatedly can be applied to have a computer do the scaffold routing for that long strand of DNA that makes DNA origami, right? And then using careful application of objective functions and simulated annealing, this what we call shape grammar can be used to have a computer build arbitrary DNA origami designs. Oftentimes designs that a human could not manage, right? So there's a laborious design process, and we're seeing these opportunities for generative design. Not to be, I guess, confused with generative AI, but just like design that runs itself, okay? All right, so we have this at the front end. And then you can imagine that if we come up with dozens to hundreds of candidates, the Cloud Lab is the perfect way to synthesize and characterize those structures, right? Because the important student work, the important contribution here is on the design side, right? And I don't think anyone in my lab is clamoring to be allowed to do those thousands of pipetting operations. Okay, all right. So, and so now we can actually make these solid structures like filled geometries. We could also make hollow ones so that you could imagine a computer could come back and say, I've got a given amount of scaffold material. I'll make the shape at the scale you want, and I'll just make it as hollow as it needs to be, right? So I think you get some higher level capability out of this that, once again, a human could not do. Okay. For a different application, which I think relates to this sort of ARPANET type approach, we've demonstrated in the past few years that we can have nationwide long-scale collaborations, where we're just shipping materials back and forth with our partners. And it's a great demonstration of this. Basically, we made these DNA origami platforms and then shipped them to Arizona so that our collaborators could attach them to human blood platelets and perform the assays, right? And so this technology is robust to shipping, and this is an example of a case where there was a lot of thought that went into designing the platform, but then about 3 days out of 5 of Vismaya's time were spent manufacturing and characterizing these DNA nanostructures so that we could actually have a biomedically focused paper with the adequate quality control we need. Okay, and so the whole point is, I didn't know how incredibly miserable this project would be, right? And so as a cloud lab, this one, I think that my students could easily do, many-fold more interesting investigations if they didn't have to spend those 3 days in the lab per week. Okay, and then I think the final example, another PhD student in my lab, Wei-Tao Wang, who's co-advised by me and Charlie Wren, has developed really sort of innovative, groundbreaking approaches to encapsulating cells. I think, I basically say these are like Iron Man suits for cells. And so if you were doing cell delivery, you wanted your cells to survive the sort of harsh fluidic environment, we can temporarily ruggedize them. And this whole paper showed that we can maintain cell viability in conditions that would basically swell and pop or rupture other cells or put them in an apoptotic pathway. And I think just the excitement for sharing this worldwide is one of the reasons I want to bring it up here, because labs around the world basically saw when this paper came out, replicated it, got in touch with us to let us know they're looking on numerous applications. And if we had a more robust way to distribute this, I think we'd be sending it out to dozens of teams, right? Okay, but the other thing I want to talk about, so these are things I'm really excited about, but I think the dark side of my lab, and everybody who comes into it, I think they're okay. They're generally okay with this. PhDs take a long time, but it takes about 6 to 9 months to get trained in my lab, right? That means that you're coming to work, you're doing your job, and you're getting really bad results for about 6 to 9 months. That burden is extraordinary, particularly when I'm asking them to be sort of computational biologists, when I'm asking them to do mechanical design and cell culture. You can sort of start to see that I'm asking too much, or maybe I'm not utilizing them to their greatest potential. And so I think for the Cloud Lab, as we have the ability to manufacture, characterize, but also potentially perform application experiments, we're looking at a very different future for what a PhD in DNA nanotechnology could look like. And so here are the 3 examples. Oh no, is that it? Okay. Yeah, so I don't have to tell you anything about the Cloud Lab. And basically what I can say to date is, does it work? Because for us, we didn't have a self-driving lab. We're not in the business of building automated facilities for research, and that means that as a user coming in, we have to figure out what processes are available at the Cloud Lab and then adapt our methods to make them work. And this is a really different process. Like if you built your own lab, you know each step works, right? But for us, we had to investigate that from the start. And I can say we can mix our buffers, make our pre-stocks, we can do arbitrary anneal ramps, when we can do adequate characterization to know that these work well. And in terms of reproducibility, every time we make something in the lab, we'll be demonstrating that we have actually overcome that hurdle, which is a huge one for my field. Okay. Sweet. So I think at the last part, obviously we like closing loops. And so one of the wonderful benefits of the Cloud Lab is imagine if we could do the testing of different candidate designs and then iterate and make new ones, you know? A human can be in that loop, but that's a beautiful loop to sort of close. Okay, and then finally, I think we're actually, I think looking forward in the next year to demonstrating each one of these capabilities at a larger scale. So with that, I just thank the students that actually do all the work and our collaborators and funding, and thank you all so much. All right, take care.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm with Covestro, and we take that to the next step, which is, okay, how do we apply these kinds of technologies in an effective way, because we're trying to run a business and trying to make money, and how do we go about doing all those sorts of things? And so for Covestro, just so you understand who we are, we're an $18 billion materials company. Typically, you're not more than a couple feet from our materials. So if you look at the back of your iPhone, that material that tells on you when you got it wet, that's made by us. The case is made by us. This countertop's probably made by us. So we're in a lot of different things. And so we're looking to do things better, looking to do things faster. Of course, now in this world of sustainability, circularity, we're trying to do all that and also make it sustainable and make it circular. And so we have 2,000 R&D scientists spread across 100 different R&D labs around the world working on just that. And this timing for this Cloud Lab has been actually really fortuitous for us, because one of the things we're doing is we're in the process of designing a new $200 million R&D facility in Germany. And so what should these labs look like? The labs we have currently right there were state-of-the-art. We designed them based on DuPont's plan from 1900. So our labs are literally over 100 years old. We're still using them. And now we're going to go to the next stage of, okay, what do these new labs look like? And so you have the cloud, you think about the analog of AWS and say, oh, yeah, that's great. You can just put it all out there and do that. And for a lot of tech companies, that was tremendously successful for them. We use the lab, we use AWS, but it isn't necessarily a complete analog for us, because if you think about, for example, high performance computing, we have a high performance computer. We also use high performance computing in the lab. And we're going to get rid of our high performance computer, and we're actually going to get another one, because the economics work to where we do enough work where it makes sense for us to have one, and also then use supplemental cloud capacity for that function. So if you think about a lab and experiments, a lot of the stuff is, as I understand it, it's biopharma based, which I'm envious of those people, because their experiments are fairly straightforward, 1 or 2 steps. You know, hey, measure this thing. You know, ours is 7 steps. You got to heat it up to a couple hundred C. You got to have under pressure. You got to do all these things. And so we have a lot of things that are much more complicated than your typical straightforward experiments. And so one of the things we look at is based on our portfolio of experiments, what can we run where? And with over 100 labs around the world, what experiments can we consolidate? We have a lot of expensive equipment that isn't necessarily utilized. And is there a way that we can tap into those pieces of equipment in ways where we don't have to have 50 NMRs around the world? We can have 6, or we can have 3, or we can have 5. And so these are things we're trying to figure out. We don't know the answers. And so with working with the cloud, we see where we can test these theories out and see, okay, what things can we outsource to where we're not going to do those experiments anymore. We'll have a third party do them. On the other hand, should we have an internal cloud where we operate kind of our own cloud, where we have equipment that then our people around the world can tap into, efficiently using resources and manpower to do experiments? You know, we don't know the answer to that. And the beauty is having access to a cloud lab now, we can try these things out and we can experiment. One of the things that just dawned on me is we work with collaborators, is a challenge in my role is I don't own really any people. So we want to do something new and cool, and people get excited about it. Okay, we need to create some data. Well, we'll get right on that. We'll get you some data by the end of November of 2024. So, you know, as you can imagine, that makes a challenge. Where with the idea with the cloud, we get somebody excited and we don't have to just distract, slow down what everybody's doing. we can flex capacity, if you will, and we can generate some data, and we can make things happen, where right now, we've got to fit that into our tight schedules of all our researchers, and no one's sitting around doing anything. If people in the corporate world, right, things are tighter, and so no one's got extra capacity. And so having the ability to tap in capacity for us will help us accelerate new things that we couldn't necessarily do in a timely manner today. And so these are all sorts of things we're working through. Also, too, I think also working with collaborators at universities, where, if you think about equipment, there's something new we're going to do. For example, we're looking at biodegradation. Well, we don't have biodegradation things right now because it's kind of new. So we've got the other weathering technologies. We spent, 7 figures per lab on that stuff. But from biodegradation, if we want to do some simulations, well, we need data, and then we're going to have to work with, some professors we like to work with. Well, having that kind of capability that's in the cloud, now we can get it all teed up and we can get off the races versus, okay, do we have to go buy some equipment now? So instead of this being a couple $100,000, now it's $1 million effort. Do we really want to invest in all that stuff? And so these are all things that we can take off the table conceivably by being able to tap into a resource like what Emerald's doing. So I guess the big key takeaway is we don't really know. And as I think one Stanford professor says, it takes a vast amount of knowledge to begin to appreciate the extent of one's own ignorance. And so we recognize there's a lot we don't know about the cloud. And actually, we're kicking off, I think we're signing the agreement this week with CMU to start our first project with them. And so we're really excited. We are in really, to give you an idea of how big a deal this is for Carnegie, or for us, and to some degree, I hope Carnegie Mellon and Emerald, is, we have really tight year, and we're not spending money on anything. We're cutting back on everything. And when this opportunity presented itself, I was shocked that we got money, and I was particularly shocked at how quickly we were able to get money to start and to work with them. It's a big deal. It's for anybody who does any kind of lab-based stuff, it's something that you're going to need to address. You need to figure out a plan and a strategy, because I think it will revolutionize the way we do R&D. So thank you very much for your time.